My family told me not to come to New Year's Eve because I would just make everyone uncomfortable with my failure. So I stayed in my apartment alone. But at exactly midnight, my brother called me, his voice shaking with terror. "What did you do, Aaliyah? Dad just saw the news and he is not breathing right." He had no idea that while they were clinking champagne glasses, I had just become the owner of their entire world. Before I tell you how I went from the family disappointment to their landlord in one night, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to succeed in silence while everyone doubted you. I am Aaliyah Washington, 32 years old. To my prestigious family in Atlanta, I am the disappointment who dropped out of Harvard Law to chase a tech fantasy. But as I sat in the center of my living room, the city sprawling out beneath me through floor-to-ceiling glass windows, I knew that narrative was about to expire. My phone buzzed on the marble coffee table, vibrating against the cold surface. It was a text from my mother, Vivian. The preview message lit up the dark room. "Please do not come tonight. We have Senator Davis and his wife attending. Your car is an eyesore in the driveway, and frankly, your current employment situation makes people uncomfortable. We told everyone you are sick with the flu. Stay home." I did not feel the sting of tears I used to feel years ago. Instead, I felt a cold, hard resolve settling in my chest like a stone. I looked up at the digital clock mounted on the wall above my multiple computer monitors. It read 12 hours until midnight, 12 hours until the ball dropped, 12 hours until the Washington family legacy, which my parents protected more fiercely than their own children, would fundamentally change hands. I picked up the phone and typed a simple reply. "Understood. Have a wonderful evening." I hit send and set the phone down. My mother thought I was sitting in a rented studio apartment, struggling to pay bills with a failing app. She had no idea that I was currently sitting in the penthouse of the Sovereign Building, a property I had purchased quietly through a shell company 3 months ago. She worried about my 10-year-old sedan parked in her driveway, unaware that my driver was currently polishing a custom Rolls-Royce in the garage downstairs waiting for my signal. The irony was suffocating. My parents, the esteemed Judge Elijah Washington and the illustrious Dr. Vivian Washington, had spent their lives curating an image of Black excellence. They measured worth in degrees from Ivy League schools and invitations to the right galas. They looked at me, the daughter who dropped out of Harvard Law to build a financial technology startup, and saw only a stain on their reputation. Tonight was their annual New Year's Eve gala, the social event of the season for Atlanta's elite, and I was officially banned. My phone illuminated the dimly lit room again, this time with a video call request from Courtney, my sister-in-law. She was the final piece of the Washington family puzzle, the white debutante from Connecticut who married my brother Dante and immediately adopted my parents' disdain for me as her own personal hobby. I swiped accept, propping the phone against a stack of legal documents I had just finished reviewing. Courtney's face filled the screen, flawless and beaming. She was already at my parents' estate, standing in what looked like the master guest suite. Behind her, I could see a rack of clothes that cost more than most people's annual salaries. "Aaliyah," she chirped, her voice high and grating. "I just wanted to check in on you. Mom said you are sick." "That is so convenient. I mean, so sad." "I am fine, Courtney," I said, keeping my voice level. "Just taking a quiet night." She stepped back from the camera, spinning slowly to show off a shimmering silver gown that clung to her frame. "Do you like it? It is a custom Vera Wang, $10,000. Dante insisted I wear it tonight. He said the wife of Atlanta's most successful investment banker needs to look the part." "It is very shiny," I commented, picking up a cup of instant noodles I had prepared earlier, not because I had to, but because I was too busy closing a billion-dollar deal to wait for the catering staff to plate the lobster. Courtney leaned into the camera, her blue eyes narrowing as she spotted the cup in my hand. "Oh my God, are you eating ramen? On New Year's Eve? That is honestly tragic, Aaliyah. I almost feel bad for you." "Almost." She laughed, a tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. You know, I was talking to your mother earlier. We were discussing how hard it must be for you knowing you are the only stain on such a pristine family record, dropping out of Harvard, living in that tiny apartment, driving that clunker. It must be humiliating to know you will never measure up to Dante. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the broth. I do not feel humiliated, Courtney. I feel patient. She rolled her eyes. Whatever that means. Look, I have to go. The makeup artist is here to do my touch-ups. Try not to choke on your noodles while you watch us on the social pages tomorrow. Oh, and do not worry about a gift for us this year. We know you cannot afford it. She reached for the button to end the call, but I spoke up, my voice cutting through her arrogance like a knife. Courtney, wait. She paused, her finger hovering over the screen. What? That dress is stunning. I said, a small, cold smile playing on my lips. But if I were you, I would make sure Dante keeps the receipt. You might need to return it tomorrow morning when the credit card bill comes due. She scoffed. You are just jealous. Goodbye, Aaliyah. The screen went black. I set the phone down and looked at the half-eaten noodles. She thought I was starving. She did not know that the acquisition contract on my desk included a clause that would allow me to buy the designer who made her dress if I wanted to. The time for insults was over. The time for collection was about to begin. Courtney's laughter was still echoing in my mind as I pushed the cup of cold noodles aside. She imagined me curled up on a sofa, sobbing into a cheap pillow, wishing I was part of their sparkling world. The reality could not have been more different. The silence in my penthouse was not the silence of abandonment. It was the heavy, electrified silence of a war room moments before the strike. My living room, which my family assumed was a cramped rental, was actually the command center for the largest fintech acquisition in Georgia history. Across the expansive mahogany table sat Marcus, my lead counsel, and Sarah, my chief financial officer. They were not wearing party hats, they were in sleeves rolled up, battle mode. The air smelled of stale coffee and high-stakes anxiety. Marcus slid a thick document across the table, his finger tapping urgently on a highlighted paragraph. Global Bank is trying to insert a last-minute non-compete clause for the core algorithm, Aaliyah. Marcus said, his voice low and dangerous. If you sign this, you cannot write a line of code for 5 years. They want to own your brain, not just the company. I picked up the document. My hand did not shake. This was the game. This was the world I built while my brother was playing golf and my mother was planning galas. Let them try, I said, my voice steady. Tell them the algorithm is part of the package, but my future innovation belongs to me. If they want a non-compete, the price goes up another $50 million. Sarah looked up from her laptop, her face pale in the blue glow of the screen. We are talking about a $1.2 billion cash deal, Aaliyah. If we push too hard, they might walk. The wire transfer is scheduled for midnight to coincide with the fiscal year end. If we miss the window, the deal floats until Monday and the market could crash by then. $1.2 billion. The number felt abstract even as I processed it. To my father, success was a 6-figure salary and a plaque on a wall. He could not comprehend the stratosphere I was operating in. He thought I was a failure because I did not have a law degree on my wall. He did not know that his daughter was about to become the owner of the bank that held his mortgage. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there in Buckhead, my family was sipping champagne and pitying me. They thought I was alone. They thought I was broken. They had no idea I was surrounded by the sharpest legal minds in the city, finalizing the paperwork that would buy and sell their entire existence 10 times over. They will not walk, Sarah, I said, turning back to my team. They need credit flow to stay relevant. They need our AI to process loans for the demographic they have ignored for decades. They need us more than we need them. Send the revision. We hold the line. Marcus nodded, a shark-like grin spreading across his face. I will make the call. The room returned to that heavy, expectant silence. The only sound was the hum of the servers in the corner and the beating of my own heart. It was not a lonely dinner. It was the last supper of my old life. and I was ready to feast. As Marcus argued on the phone, the sound of the rain against the penthouse glass pulled me back. Suddenly, I was not in a climate-controlled war room. I was standing on the gravel driveway of the Washington estate, shivering in a hoodie that was soaking wet. It was 5 years ago, almost to the day. The worst night of my life. The night I affectionately call Judgment Day. I had just driven 14 hours straight from Massachusetts. My car was packed with textbooks I would never open again, and a dream that everyone called a delusion. I stood before my father, Judge Elijah Washington. He stood in the doorway, blocking the warmth of the home I grew up in. He looked down at me from the porch steps, like I was a defendant he had just sentenced to life without parole. "You are quitting Harvard," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. "You are trading a Juris Doctor for what exactly? A website. A hustle." "It is a platform, Dad," I pleaded, wiping rain from my eyes. "It uses machine learning to help our community get fair loans. It is important work. It is merchant work." He spat the word out like a curse. "In this family, we shape the law. We heal the sick. We do not peddle products like common street vendors. You are degrading yourself, Aaliyah, and you are embarrassing us." Then came the moment that froze my heart forever. He did not just close the door. He walked past me to my car, grabbed my duffel bag from the trunk, and hurled it onto the wet grass. The zipper broke. My clothes, my underwear, my journals spilled out into the mud. "If you choose to be a dropout, you choose poverty," he declared, looming over me. "The Washington legacy does not harbor failures. Do not ask for money. Do not use our name. As far as this family is concerned, you died the moment you walked out of that law school." I looked up at the second-floor window, hoping for salvation. My mother, Dr. Vivian Washington, was standing there watching. She saw her husband throw her daughter onto the street. She saw me shivering. She saw me crying. And then she slowly reached up and closed the heavy velvet curtains, turning her back on me. I gathered my muddy clothes in silence. I did not scream. I did not beg. I got into my beat-up sedan and drove away. That night, I made a vow to the windshield wipers fighting the storm. I vowed that the next time I stood on that driveway, I would not be asking for permission to enter. I would be holding the deed. The memory faded as Sarah touched my arm, bringing me back to the present. The cold resolve from that rainy night flooded my veins. My father called me a merchant. He was right. And I was about to complete the most expensive transaction of his life. Across the city, the atmosphere at the Washington estate was heavy with the scent of expensive perfume and the sound of polite laughter. But inside my father's private study, there was only the smell of fear. Dante Washington, the golden boy, who could do no wrong, was currently sweating through his custom tuxedo. He locked the heavy mahogany door with a shaking hand, trying to drown out the sounds of the gala outside. To the guests, he was a brilliant investment banker. To the market, he was the desperate man who had leveraged his clients' portfolios on a speculative cryptocurrency that had crashed 40% in the last hour. He was drowning, and he knew there was only one life raft left. He sat at our father's massive desk, the same desk where Judge Washington had denied me tuition money years ago. Dante opened the laptop, his eyes bloodshot and frantic. He needed $5 million to cover the margin call before the fiscal year closed at midnight. If he missed the deadline, the SEC would be knocking on his door by sunrise. He navigated to the secure banking portal for the Washington Family Trust. This was the holy grail of our family's wealth, the accumulation of 40 years of my parents' labor and reputation. My father trusted Dante with the access codes because Dante was the son who followed the rules. Dante was the success story. I was just the cautionary tale. Dante typed in the password, his fingers slipping on the keys. He paused for a fraction of a second, staring at the balance. It was enough. It was exactly enough to save his skin. "I will put it back," he whispered to the empty room, his voice cracking. "Just one big trade next week. I will double it and put it back before they even notice." It was the lie of an addict. He clicked transfer. The screen buffered for a terrifying moment before displaying the confirmation. Transaction complete. The funds were gone. He slumped back in the chair, exhaling a breath he felt like he had been holding for weeks. He wiped the sweat from his forehead with a silk handkerchief and stood up, checking his reflection in the glass of the bookcase. He practiced his smile. It was charming. It was fake. It was the smile of a man who thought he had gotten away with murder. He unlocked the door and stepped back out into the hallway, ready to toast to a prosperous new year. He had no idea that the trust fund had a fail-safe clause installed by my grandfather years ago, a digital tripwire that notified the secondary trustee of any transaction over $50,000. And he certainly did not know that the secondary trustee was the sister he had mocked just hours ago. While I was fighting for the valuation of my life's work, the Washington estate was vibrating with the kind of performative wealth that only insecure people feel the need to display. My mother had outdone herself this year. She had imported white orchids from Thailand and hired a jazz quartet that usually only played at presidential inaugurations. Waiters in white gloves circulated with trays of caviar, ensuring that the champagne flutes never dipped below half full. It was a perfect sparkling cage designed to convince the elite of Atlanta that the Washington legacy was untouchable. Judge Elijah Washington stood by the fireplace, one hand resting casually on the marble mantelpiece, while the other held a glass of scotch that cost more than my first car. He was holding court with Senator Davis, a man whose endorsement could make or break careers. My mother, Dr. Vivian Washington, stood by his side in a gold gown, her smile fixed and radiant. They looked like royalty. They looked like they did not have a care in the world. "And where is your other child?" Senator Davis asked, looking around the room. "I have heard rumors that you have a daughter. Is she here tonight?" My mother did not even blink. Her laugh was light and practiced a musical sound that hid 1,000 secrets. "Oh, Aaliyah," she said breezily. "We miss her terribly. She is currently in Paris completing a very exclusive fellowship in international law. She wanted to fly back, but we told her that her studies must come first. You know how dedicated she is." The lie slid off her tongue like silk. Paris. International law. It was a fantasy she had constructed to mask the reality she found so shameful. She could not admit that her daughter was 10 miles away building a tech empire from a laptop. She could not admit that she had banned me from the house because my presence was a reminder of her failure to control me. She preferred a prestigious fiction over a gritty truth. The senator nodded, impressed. "Remarkable. You must be so proud. Both children so successful. Dante in banking and Aaliyah in law. You have raised them well, Elijah." "We try, Senator," my father said, his chest puffing out. "We simply instilled in them the values of hard work and integrity." Integrity. The word hung in the air, heavy with irony. Just down the hall, the son whose integrity he was boasting about was splashing cold water on his face, trying to wash away the guilt of embezzling $5 million from the very people praising him. Dante rejoined the party a moment later, his smile a little too wide, his laughter a little too loud. He clapped the senator on the back, acting the part of the titan of industry, while inside he was a crumbling ruin. They were all playing their parts in a tragedy they did not even know had started. And I was the only one with the script. Back in my penthouse, the atmosphere had shifted from tense anticipation to a suffocating dread. The only sound in the room was the hum of the hard drives and the frantic tapping of Sarah's fingers on her keyboard. Marcus stood by the window holding his phone to his ear, his knuckles white as he gripped the device. He listened for a moment longer, then lowered the phone slowly and turned to face me. His expression was grim, the look of a general delivering news of a massacre. "They are trying to re-trade Aaliyah," he said, his voice flat. "The global bank CEO just called. He claims the market volatility index spiked in the last hour. They are pulling the offer of $1.2 billion. They are offering a flat $1 billion. Take it or leave it." The room went deathly silent. $200 million. They were trying to shave off an amount that was more than my father would earn in 10 lifetimes just because they thought they could. They thought I was just a lucky girl with a laptop. They thought I would be so dazzled by the word billion that I would not fight for the rest. They were wrong. I stood up from my leather chair. I did not tremble. I did not cry. I felt a surge of cold, white-hot rage that clarified my vision like a lightning strike. I walked over to the conference table where the speakerphone sat in the center like a sleek black idol. I did not ask Marcus to speak for me. I did not look at Sarah for reassurance. I reached out and hit the button to unmute the line. "Listen to me very carefully, gentlemen." I said, my voice low and steady, vibrating with a menace that made even my own lawyer take a step back. You think because I am a young black woman in tech that I am desperate for your validation. You think I will take the safe billion and run because I should just be grateful to be at the table. I slammed my hand down on the heavy mahogany surface. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot, making Sarah jump. My technology is the only thing standing between your obsolete banking model and extinction, I hissed into the speaker. You are not doing me a favor. You are buying your survival. You have seen the user data. You know that credit flow owns the demographic you have been trying to reach for 20 years. Without my algorithm, you are dinosaurs waiting for the meteor. I checked the Patek Philippe watch on my wrist, a gift I had bought myself when I made my first million. You have exactly 5 minutes to send the original contract with the $1.2 billion figure. If I do not see the correct DocuSign in my inbox by 11:45, I am hanging up. And then I am calling your biggest competitor in London, and I will sell it to them for 900 million just to watch them put you out of business. I hit the mute button again, cutting off their sputtered protests. I leaned over the table, breathing hard, my eyes locked on the phone. Sarah looked terrified, her face pale in the blue light of her monitors. Marcus looked at me with a mixture of shock and reverence. "You are bluffing," Sarah whispered. "You would not really burn $200 million just to spite them." I straightened up, smoothing my silk lapels. I looked at her and smiled a smile that did not reach my eyes. "Watch me. This is not about the money anymore, Sarah. This is about power. And I am not giving them an inch. Not tonight. Not ever." My phone lit up again, cutting through the dim blue light of the war room. It was a text message from Dante. I picked it up expecting an apology or maybe a drunken boast about the party. Instead, I saw a notification from Venmo. "Dante Washington sent you $500. The memo line read simply, "Dinner on me." Below the transfer notification, a text message followed. "Buy yourself something decent to eat tonight, Aaliyah. Do not call Mom and Dad. They are entertaining the senator and do not need your drama bringing down the mood. Happy New Year, sis." I stared at the screen for a long moment, letting the sheer audacity of it wash over me. $500. To him it was a generous allowance, a crumb thrown from the high table to the starving dog outside. He probably felt like a saint right now. He probably walked back into that ballroom, adjusting his silk tie, feeling a warm glow of benevolence in his chest. He had done his good deed for the year. He had fed his poor failure of a sister. I looked up at the monitor on my left, where the security alert from the family trust was still blinking in red text. Unauthorized transfer, $5 million. The irony was so sharp it almost drew blood. My brother, the golden child. The financial wizard, the pride of the Washington dynasty, had just stolen $5 million from our parents' retirement fund to cover his own incompetence. And then minutes later he tossed me $500 of that stolen money to keep me quiet. He thought he was the savior. He thought he was the one holding the family together, protecting our parents from the embarrassment of my existence. He had no clue that he was actually the arsonist standing in the middle of a burning house holding a match and smiling at the cameras. I did not accept the transfer. I did not decline it either. I let it sit there, a digital monument to his arrogance. $500. That amount would not even cover the hourly rate of the junior paralegal sitting in the corner of my office right now. It would not buy a single bottle of the champagne chilling on my dining table. It was an insult wrapped in pity and delivered with a sneer. Marcus noticed my expression and looked up from his stack of contracts. Everything okay, boss? I showed him the phone screen. My brother just sent me allowance money. He told me not to bother the adults tonight. Marcus snorted a short, harsh sound. He has no idea, does he? No, I said, setting the phone face down on the cool marble. He thinks he is on top of the world. He thinks he just pulled off the perfect crime and bought off his guilty conscience for the price of a steak dinner. He is celebrating his cleverness right now. He is probably shaking the senator's hand, thinking about how he saved the day. I walked over to the window, looking out toward the distant lights of Buckhead, where my family was partying on the edge of a cliff. Dante did not know that the ground had already crumbled beneath his feet. He did not know that the $500 he sent me was the last money he would ever control. He thought he was silencing me. He was actually fueling me. I turned back to my team, my voice calm and cold. Let's get back to work. I want the deed to the Washington estate prepared and ready for transfer the second the clock strikes 12. If my brother wants to play the benefactor, I will show him what real charity looks like. I will show him the difference between throwing crumbs and owning the bakery. My phone rang with a melody that cut through the tension of the war room like a ray of warm sunlight. It was not the sharp digital trill of a business call. It was a recording of an old gospel choir singing, "His eye is on the sparrow." It was the ringtone assigned to only one person in the world, Grandma Hattie. I held up a hand to Marcus, who was about to speak. "Silence," I commanded softly. The room froze. I picked up the phone, my voice shifting instantly from CEO to granddaughter. "Grandma, is everything okay?" The background noise on her end was muffled, like she was pressing the phone against her chest. When she spoke, her voice was thick with unshed tears. "Baby, I am hiding in the downstairs powder room. I had to turn the faucet on so your mother would not hear me talking to you." The image of my 80-year-old grandmother, the true matriarch of this family, hiding in a bathroom in her own son's house, broke my heart. Hattie Washington was a woman who had marched for civil rights, who had raised 3 children on a seamstress's wage so my father could go to law school, and now she was being treated like an inconvenient accessory at her own family's gala. "It is just not right, Aaliyah," she continued, her voice trembling. "They are all out there laughing and eating crab cakes and acting like they did not leave you out in the cold. Your daddy is telling everyone you are in Paris. I almost hit him with my cane. I told him the Lord does not like liars, but Vivian just shushed me and told me to fix my wig." I chuckled despite the lump in my throat. "I wish you had hit him, Grandma. But do not waste your energy on them. Are you okay?" "I am lonely, baby," she whispered. "All these fancy people with their diamond necklaces and empty smiles, none of them are real. I just wanted to bring in the new year with my granddaughter. I wanted to see your face." They sat me at a table in the back near the kitchen door, like I am something to be hidden away. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 8 o'clock. 4 hours. Just 4 more hours until the wire hit. Just 4 more hours until I could tear down the facade my parents had built and rescue the only person worth saving. "Listen to me, Grandma," I said, my voice low and fierce. "I need you to be strong for just a little longer. Dry your eyes. Do not let them see you cry. Go back out there. Eat the expensive food. Let them think they have won. But keep your phone close. Because at exactly midnight, I am coming to get you." "You are," she asked, hope creeping into her voice. "You are coming to the party." "I am not just coming to the party, Grandma. I am coming to take you home. And I am not coming in my old Honda. I am coming to get you in a way you have never seen before. We are going to leave in style. I am going to sweep you out of there so fast their heads will spin." "You trust me, do not you?" "I always trust you, baby," she said. "Since you were a little girl with big glasses reading financial papers instead of comic books, you were always the smart one." "I love you, Grandma. I will see you at 12. I hung up the phone. The sadness in my chest evaporated, replaced by a burning, protective fury. My father had put his own mother in a corner. My mother had silenced her. They treated everyone like props in their stage play of perfection. I looked at Sarah and Marcus. Get the bank back on the line. We are closing this deal now. I have a very important pickup to make at midnight, and I refuse to be late. The conference room was silent as Marcus reconnected the call. I could feel the arrogance radiating through the speakerphone before the bank CEO even spoke. They expected me to be grateful. They expected me to be scared. They had no idea that I had spent the last 5 years building a trap, and they had just walked right into it. Mr. Sterling, the CEO of Global Bank, spoke first. His voice was smooth and condescending. Look, Ms. Washington, we appreciate your passion, but $1 billion is a generous offer for a startup with your risk profile. Take it or leave it. I leaned into the microphone. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I had something better than volume. I had leverage. Check your secure inbox. Mr. Sterling, I said, I just sent you a file. It is encrypted. The password is the amount of money you are losing every second you waste my time. I heard the sound of clicking on the other end, then a sharp intake of breath. What is this? Sterling asked, his composure slipping. That I replied is the Holy Grail. That is 5 years of proprietary credit data on 50 million underserved borrowers. People you rejected. People your algorithms ignored. People who have a 99% repayment rate on my platform. I call it the invisible prime market. I paused to let the weight of that sink in. You are not buying software, Mr. Sterling. You are buying access to the fastest growing demographic in the economy. If you walk away now, you are not just losing a deal. You are handing the future of banking to your competitors in London. They are online too, by the way, and they are very interested in that data. The silence on the line stretched for 10 agonizing seconds. Sarah looked at me, her eyes wide. Marcus held his breath. Then Sterling spoke again. His voice was different now. The condescension was gone, replaced by the hungry urgency of a predator realizing he had met a bigger beast. 1.2 billion, he said. Cash and stock. No non-compete on future ventures. But we get exclusive rights to the dataset. I smiled at Sarah. She looked like she might faint. Done, I said. Have your legal team send the final execution copy immediately. We sign at 11:55. The wire hits at midnight. Do not be late, Mr. Sterling. I have a party to get to. I ended the call. The room erupted. Sarah let out a scream of joy and hugged Marcus. My legal team was high-fiving. We had done it. We had forced the biggest bank in the world to bend the knee. I walked over to the window and looked out at the city. The rain had stopped. The lights of Atlanta burned bright below me. I felt a surge of power so intense it was almost dizzying. I was not just Aaliyah the dropout anymore. I was Aaliyah the billionaire. And in exactly 2 hours, my family was going to find out exactly what that meant. While Marcus was printing the final execution copies, I picked up my personal phone. A notification popped up. Courtney Vance Washington is live. I tapped the screen. The quiet hum of my penthouse was instantly replaced by the tinny noise of a jazz band and the clinking of crystal coming from my phone speakers. Courtney filled the frame. She was holding a glass of champagne and pouting at the camera lens. She was broadcasting to her private circle of Atlanta socialite wives, a group that prided themselves on exclusion and status. Hey ladies, she cooed. We are having the most fabulous time. The senator just loved Dante's toast. It is so nice to have a drama-free holiday for once. She began walking through the ballroom holding the phone high. She passed my mother, who waved regally. She passed my father, who was laughing at a joke he probably did not understand. Then she stopped at the family table. It was set for 12, but one chair was conspicuously empty. Mine. Courtney zoomed in on the empty place setting. See that she whispered loudly to her audience. That is where my sister-in-law Aaliyah was supposed to sit, but we all agreed it was better if she stayed home. You know how it is when someone just refuses to get their life together. It brings such a negative energy to the room. Honestly, we are all relieved. It is hard to celebrate success when someone is sitting right there reminding you of failure. The comments on the side of the screen flew by. Poor you. You are a saint for dealing with her. She sounds jealous. I felt a cold fire ignite in my stomach. She was not just excluding me, she was publicly assassinating my character to the very people who could influence my future philanthropic work. She was painting me as a charity case, a burden, a family secret to be hidden away. I switched apps and opened my messages. I typed a single text to Courtney. Careful, Courtney. The internet is forever. And so are lawsuits for defamation. Enjoy the party. I switched back to the live stream just in time to see the notification banner drop down on her screen. Courtney read it. Her eyes widened for a fraction of a second, a flash of fear breaking through the Botox. Then she laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. Speaking of toxic energy, she said to her audience, she just texted me. Can you believe the audacity, ruining my vibe from 10 miles away? She tapped furiously on her screen. Blocked, deleted, goodbye drama. The live stream did not cut off, but I knew my number was now in her block list. She smiled triumphantly at the camera, raising her glass. Cheers to cutting out dead weight in the new year. I set the phone down on the marble table. Dead weight. She had no idea how heavy gold could be. She thought she had silenced me. She thought she had won the social media war. But she had just given me the motivation to turn her entire reality upside down. Marcus walked back in, holding a fresh stack of papers. We are ready for the final review, Aaliyah. Good, I said, not taking my eyes off the black screen of my phone. Because I just found another reason to raise the rent. My phone buzzed again almost immediately after Courtney's live stream ended. The screen displayed a photo of my mother, Dr. Vivian Washington, smiling beneath a wide-brimmed hat at a garden party. It was a picture of perfect maternal warmth, but I knew the woman on the other end of the line was anything but warm. I hesitated for a split second. Part of me, the part that was still a little girl wanting approval, hoped she was calling to apologize for Courtney's behavior. Maybe she saw the live stream. Maybe she realized they had gone too far. I answered the call. Hello, Mother. Aaliyah, her voice was crisp and low, the tone she used when scolding a student or firing a housekeeper. I just spoke to Courtney. She said you are harassing her with text messages. I almost laughed. Harassing. I sent one text, Mother. She was broadcasting my empty chair to half of Atlanta and calling me a failure. I do not care what she was doing. Vivian cut me off sharply. She is inside the ballroom. She is a guest of honor. You are sitting in that apartment of yours, probably looking for attention. I am calling to make one thing perfectly clear. Do not come here tonight. I stared at the city lights blurring slightly as my eyes watered against my will. I was not planning to come, Mother. You made it very clear I was not welcome. Good, she said. But I know you, Aaliyah. You get these moods. You get righteous. You think showing up and making a scene will prove some kind of point. It will not. It will only embarrass your father and me in front of the senator. We have worked too hard to build this reputation. We cannot let your instability tarnish it. My instability. The word hung in the air, heavy and toxic. She was talking about the most focused, disciplined years of my life, as if they were a temper tantrum. Listen to me closely, Aaliyah, she continued, her voice dropping to a whisper that sounded like a hiss. You need to know your place. You chose a path that leads nowhere. You chose to be ordinary. Tonight is for people who have achieved something. Your brother has achieved something. Your father has achieved something. You are just existing. I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. Is that all I am to you, Mother? A risk to be managed. She sighed, a sound of infinite patience wearing thin. You are my daughter, Aaliyah. I love you. But love does not mean I have to indulge your delusions. The greatest gift you can give this family tonight is your absence. Stay away. Let us enjoy our success without having to explain yours away. Do not call again until you are ready to apologize for upsetting Courtney. The line went dead. She hung up. She did not say Happy New Year. She did not ask if I had eaten. She told me my absence was a gift. I lowered the phone slowly. The pain was there, searing and hot, but it was different this time. It was the pain of cauterization. The wound was being burned shut. She had just severed the last thread of hope I had held on to. She thought she was protecting her legacy. She did not realize she had just signed the death warrant for it. I looked at the clock. 11 p.m. 1 hour. Marcus walked in, his face pale but determined. The final execution copies are ready, Aaliyah. We just need your signature. I stood up. I walked over to the desk. I did not look back at the phone. I picked up the pen. Let's sign, I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. My mother wants a gift. I am going to give her one she will never forget. The digital clock on the wall flickered to 10:00 p.m. The red numbers burned into the dimly lit room, marking the point of no return. 2 hours. That was all that remained of the old world. In front of me on the expansive mahogany conference table lay the final execution copy of the acquisition agreement. It was a stack of crisp white paper, about 2 inches thick, bound with a simple black clip. It looked innocuous. It looked like just another stack of legal jargon. But inside those pages was the end of my struggle and the beginning of my reign. Marcus stepped forward, his movements reverent as if he were approaching an altar. He placed a heavy black fountain pen next to the signature line. It was a Mont Blanc, weighted and cold to the touch. It felt less like a writing instrument and more like a weapon. We are ready, Aaliyah. Marcus said, his voice hushed in the quiet penthouse. All contingencies have been waived. The regulatory approval is pre-cleared. The wire transfer is queued in the international clearing system. Once you put your name on this line, there is no going back. You are selling credit flow. You are selling your life's work. I looked up at him, my expression unreadable. I am not selling my life's work, Marcus. I am buying my freedom. I reached out and picked up the pen. The metal warmed instantly against my skin. I did not hesitate. I did not tremble. I leaned forward and pressed the nib to the paper. The ink flowed smooth and dark. Aaliyah Washington. With every loop of the letters, I felt a heavy chain falling away from my shoulders. The title of failure. The label of dropout. The identity of the disappointment. I was signing them all away. When I lifted the pen, I was no longer the girl who slept in her car. I was a billionaire. Sarah let out a long, shaky exhale from the other side of the table. Her eyes were wet. Congratulations, she whispered. You did it. We need to call the PR firm immediately. We need to get the press release out to the wire services. The Asian markets open soon. No. My voice cut through the celebratory atmosphere like a blade. Sarah froze, her hand hovering over her phone. No press release yet, I said, standing up and walking over to the floor-to-ceiling window. I looked out at the Atlanta skyline, the city lights twinkling below me like a bed of diamonds. Somewhere out there in the exclusive enclave of Buckhead, my parents were laughing. My brother was lying. My sister-in-law was preening. Sarah looked confused. But Aaliyah, we want to control the narrative. If we wait until Monday, the rumors might leak. I turned back to face them, my silhouette framed by the city. I am controlling the narrative, Sarah. That is exactly what I am doing. Contact the agency. Tell them the embargo is absolute. Total radio silence. Not a tweet, not a leak, not a whisper. Marcus frowned. Then when do we go live? Midnight, I said. 12:00 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Exactly. Midnight, Marcus repeated. Why midnight? You are competing with the New Year celebrations. No one reads financial news when the ball drops. My family does, I replied, my voice cold and hard. My father has a tradition. Every single New Year at midnight after the toast, he turns on the television to watch the global financial recap. He wants to see the Asian market opening numbers. He wants to start his year feeling rich. He wants to feel powerful. He wants to remind everyone in the room that he understands the economy better than they do. I walked back to the table and looked down at the signed contract. $1.2 billion. It was a number that didn't just mean wealth, it meant absolute power. I want the first thing he sees in the new year to be my face, I said. I want the headline to flash across that massive screen in his ballroom while he is holding his crystal champagne flute. I want him to see my name next to the word billionaire. I want him to choke on his toast. Sarah swallowed hard, nodding slowly. Understood. Midnight. I will set the automated release. Do it, I commanded. Make sure every news outlet in the city has the packet. Make sure the notification hits every smartphone in that ballroom. I want the phones to light up like fireworks. I sat back down in my leather chair and spun it around to face the window again. 10:15. 1 hour and 45 minutes. The deed was done. The trap was set. Now all I had to do was wait. The silence in the room returned, but it was different now. It was not the nervous silence of negotiation. It was the predatory silence of a hunter who has already fired the arrow and is just waiting for it to land. Enjoy the party, Mother. It is going to be your last one as the Queen of Atlanta. Back at the Washington estate, the champagne had done its work. The initial tension of the evening had dissolved into a haze of expensive alcohol and unearned confidence. Dante Washington was holding court in the center of the ballroom, his tuxedo jacket unbuttoned, his tie slightly loosened. He held a crystal flute in one hand and gestured expansively with the other. A circle of admirers, including the senator, surrounded him, hanging on his every word. I am telling you, Dante boomed, his voice slurring just enough to be noticeable to anyone not equally intoxicated. Next year is going to be monumental. I am looking at property in the Caribbean. An island, actually. Private, just for the family. We need a place to escape the noise of success, right? The crowd laughed politely, a ripple of sycophantic amusement. They saw a young titan of industry. They saw a man so wealthy he could buy geography. They did not see the man who had just committed a federal crime an hour ago to keep the lights on. They did not see the man who had secretly signed a high-interest lien against the family estate yesterday morning just to pay off a gambling debt that had spiraled out of control. Elijah stood a few feet away, watching his son with an expression of pure, unadulterated pride. He swirled his scotch, nodding to the man next to him. "That is my boy," he said, his voice thick with satisfaction. "He has the vision. He takes after his grandfather, always thinking big." Vivian beamed, clutching her bag like a scepter. She looked at Dante not as a person, but as a trophy she had polished to perfection. This was the moment she lived for, the moment where her genetic legacy was validated by the envy of her peers. She did not see the sweat glistening on Dante's upper lip. She did not notice the way his eyes darted nervously toward the door every time a waiter walked in too quickly. She only saw the reflection of her own ego. Dante took another large gulp of champagne, drowning the voice in his head that was screaming about margin calls and prison sentences. He leaned in closer to the senator. "You should come down, Senator," he insisted, his hand heavy on the older man's shoulder. "Once I close on the island, we will host a summit. Real movers and shakers. We are going to reshape the financial landscape of the South." The senator smiled, a politician's smile, practiced and vacant. "I look forward to it, Dante. You Washingtons certainly know how to make an impression." Dante laughed, a sound that was too loud, too sharp. "We certainly do, Senator. We certainly do." He spun around looking for his wife. "Courtney, Courtney, come here. Tell them about the yacht we are commissioning." Courtney glided over, her diamond bracelet catching the light. She slipped her arm through his, playing the part of the adoring wife, perfectly unaware that the roof over her head now belonged to a shark named Vinny. "We are calling it the Legacy," she purred, resting her head on his shoulder, "because that is what this family is all about." Dante kissed her temple, his eyes squeezing shut for a brief second. He felt invincible. The alcohol had convinced him that the transfer he made earlier had solved everything. He convinced himself that the market would bounce back, that he would replace the money, and that no one would ever know he had sold their future to save his present. He stood in the center of his parents' living room, surrounded by flowers and music and lies, believing he was the king of the world. He did not know the guillotine was already falling. Back in the master suite, I stripped off the silk pajamas that had witnessed the birth of a billion-dollar empire. It was time to put on my armor. I walked into the walk-in closet, a space larger than the bedroom my parents had forced me to sleep in during my teenage years. Hanging in the center was a garment bag from Paris. I unzipped it, revealing a custom haute couture gown commissioned 6 months ago specifically for this night. It was structured architectural and a deep midnight blue that looked almost black. It was not a dress designed to blend in. It was designed to dominate. I stepped into the silk and fastened it. The fabric hugged my frame like a second skin tailored to the millimeter. I moved to the vanity where a makeup artist I had hired privately had been waiting patiently for the last hour. She worked in silence, applying a look that was sharp and severe. A dark red lip, a winged eyeliner that could cut glass. I did not want to look soft. I wanted to look like judgment. Then came the final touch. I moved to the wall safe hidden behind a painting of the Atlanta skyline. I punched in the code. Inside sat a heavy velvet box. I opened it. The diamond necklace inside glittered with a cold fire. It was a vintage Cartier piece, sourced from an auction in Geneva. $500,000. 10 times the value of the bracelet Courtney had shoved in my face earlier. She wore jewelry to show off her husband's credit limit. I wore jewelry to show off my own net worth. I clasped the diamonds around my neck. The weight was grounding. I looked in the mirror. The tired girl who begged for tuition money was gone. In her place stood a woman who could buy the university. I took one last breath, inhaling the scent of expensive perfume and cold resolve. Then I turned and walked out. When I stepped back into the living room, the chatter died instantly. Marcus adjusted his tie. Sarah stood up straighter. They were not looking at their boss anymore. They were looking at a titan. Even the lawyers who had seen everything seemed to hold their breath. "Let's go," I said. We took the private elevator down to the garage. The doors opened to a scene that would have made my father weep with envy. A fleet of 3 black Escalades idled, their engines purring in the concrete echo chamber. In the center sat a silver Rolls-Royce Phantom extended wheelbase. 4 men in dark suits stood waiting. They were not valet drivers. They were private security, former military, hired specifically for tonight. My head of security, a massive man named Bishop, opened the rear door of the Phantom. I slid into the leather interior. It smelled of power and old money. Marcus and Sarah got into the lead SUV. I checked the time on my phone. 11:30. 30 minutes to midnight. 30 minutes until the world turned upside down. "Driver," I said, my voice calm. "Take us to Buckhead, and do not stop at the gate. Drive right up to the front door. We are not guests tonight. We are the main event." The interior of the Rolls-Royce Phantom was a sanctuary of silence and soft leather. The city lights of Atlanta blurred past the tinted windows, a stream of gold and red against the darkness. I sat in the back, my posture rigid, the Cartier diamonds cold against my collarbone. It was 11 o'clock exactly. 1 hour left. My phone buzzed against the leather seat, breaking the stillness. The screen lit up with a caller ID that used to make my stomach clench with anxiety. Judge Elijah Washington. I stared at it for a moment. He was calling to twist the knife one last time. He wanted to make sure I knew my place before the ball dropped. I picked up the phone. I did not say hello. I just listened. "Aaliyah." His voice boomed through the speaker, filling the quiet cabin with his indignation. "I just saw the comment you left on Courtney's video. Have you lost your mind? You are harassing your brother's wife on a public platform. Do you have any idea how petty you look?" I looked out the window at the passing cars. Ordinary people going to ordinary parties, unaware that a titan was moving among them. I did not harass her father. I said, my voice smooth and detached. I simply gave her some financial advice. She is going to need it. He scoffed a harsh, dismissive sound. Financial advice? From you? From Paisa. That is rich. You are living in a fantasy world, Aliyah. You think because you learned some computer code you are an expert. Dante is a managing partner at a top firm. He manages millions. You manage a checkbook that is probably overdrawn. He took a breath, his voice dropping to that cold, judicial tone he used when sentencing criminals. I called to tell you that you are officially cut off. I am done making excuses for you. I am done hoping you will turn into someone worthy of this name. You are the single biggest disappointment of my life. The words hung in the air. Years ago, they would have shattered me. I would have cried. I would have begged for his validation. But tonight, they just felt like fuel. He was pouring gasoline on a fire he did not even know was burning. He was giving me the moral clearance to destroy him. I waited a beat, letting the silence stretch until I knew he was uncomfortable. I did not raise my voice. I did not sound angry. I sounded like a judge delivering a verdict. You are right, Judge, I said. I am a disappointment to the version of this family you created, the version that relies on lies and debt and appearances. But you should save your energy, Father. You are going to need it. What are you talking about? He demanded. I am talking about midnight, I replied. When you turn on that television to watch the market recap, when you raise your glass to toast your successful son. I want you to remember this conversation. I want you to remember that you called me a disappointment. Because at 12 o'clock, the world is going to tell you a very different story. And you are going to realize that you bet on the wrong horse. I hung up the phone before he could respond. I did not block him. I wanted him to be able to call me back in an hour. I wanted to hear the panic in his voice when the truth hit him. I placed the phone back on the seat. The Rolls-Royce turned off the highway and began the climb toward the exclusive gates of Buckhead. The engine purred a low growl of power. We were getting closer. The stage was set, the players were in place, and the disappointment was coming home to collect. The convoy moved through the streets of Atlanta like a dark river cutting through the night. We were no longer on the highway. We had entered the winding tree-lined avenues of Buckhead, where the houses sat far back from the road behind iron gates and high hedges. My driver navigated the turns with the precision of a surgeon, the massive Rolls-Royce gliding over the pavement as if it were floating. Behind us, the three Escalades followed in tight formation, their headlights cutting through the darkness. We looked like a motorcade for a head of state, or perhaps a hit squad. In a way, we were both. I watched the familiar landmarks pass by the window. The country club where I was told to wait in the car while my father networked. The private school that had suspended me for questioning a teacher's bias. Every street corner held a memory of being lesser than being other, being the disappointment. But tonight the landscape looked different. It looked small. It looked like territory waiting to be conquered. Inside the Washington estate, the air conditioning was fighting a losing battle against the body heat of 200 guests and the rising panic of one man. Dante Washington felt his phone vibrate in the inner pocket of his tuxedo jacket. It was a heavy, insistent buzz that made his heart skip a beat. He assumed it was the confirmation from his bank that the $5 million transfer had cleared, covering his margin call. He excused himself from a conversation with the senator's wife, flashing a charming smile that felt like it was glued to his face. He stepped into the shadow of a large fern near the terrace doors and pulled out his phone. He expected to see a green check mark. Instead, he saw a text message from a number saved only as V. The message was short. It was brutal. It was the end of the world. Time is up, Washington. The wire did not hit. I do not care about excuses. I am sending a crew to secure the asset at 8 a.m. Have your parents packed. We are taking the house. Dante stared at the screen. The room spun. The wire did not hit. The bank's fraud detection algorithms must have flagged the transfer from the trust. He had stolen the money, but he could not move it fast enough. And now, Vinny the loan shark who held the lien Dante had secretly signed against the estate was calling in the debt. A wave of nausea rolled over him so violent he had to grab the doorframe to stay upright. His vision blurred at the edges. He looked out at the party. He saw his mother laughing, her head thrown back, enjoying the triumph of the evening. He saw his father pointing to the ceiling chandelier, boasting about its history. They were standing in a house they no longer owned. They were celebrating a legacy that had just been repossessed by a man who broke kneecaps for a living. Dante wiped a line of cold sweat from his upper lip. He could not tell them. Not now. Not with the senator here. He shoved the phone back into his pocket, his hand trembling uncontrollably. He had to keep the act going. He had to survive until midnight. Maybe he could call Vinny in the morning. Maybe he could beg. Dante, honey, come here. It was Courtney waving him over from the center of the room. The photographer wants a picture of the power couple. Dante forced his legs to move. He walked back into the light. He wrapped his arm around his wife's waist. He smiled for the camera. The flash went off, blinding him, leaving him in darkness even as he stood in the brightest room in Atlanta. He was a dead man walking, and he knew it. He just did not know that the executioner was already pulling into the driveway. Inside the ballroom, the energy began to shift subtly, like the barometric pressure dropping before a tornado. It started in the corners of the room, away from the jazz band and the flowing champagne fountains. A few younger guests, the associates and the junior partners who were glued to their smartphones even at social events, noticed it first. Their screens lit up with push notifications from Bloomberg and TechCrunch. The headlines were vague but electrifying. Rumors of a massive acquisition in the Atlanta tech sector, a local unicorn born overnight. The valuation was rumored to be over $1 billion. The whispers spread from the edges of the room toward the center, moving like a contagion. Did you see the tweet? Who is the founder? They say it is a minority-owned fintech firm. The speculation grew louder, competing with the music. In a room full of people who measured their self-worth by their proximity to power, the idea that a new king or queen had just been crowned in their city was intoxicating. They wanted to know who it was. They wanted to know if they knew them. They wanted to know if they could claim credit for knowing them. Mr. Henderson, a rival attorney who had always envied my father's social standing, saw an opportunity to stir the pot. He walked up to where Elijah was holding court near the fireplace, his phone in his hand. "Elijah," he said, his voice loud enough to draw attention. "Have you seen the financial feeds? The markets are buzzing about a mystery deal closing at midnight right here in Atlanta. Some company called Credit Flow." Elijah swirled his scotch, looking bored. "I do not pay attention to rumors, Henderson. I focus on facts. And the fact is that real wealth is built over generations, not overnight on the internet." Henderson smiled, a tight, predatory grin. "That is the interesting part. The rumor mill says the founder is a Washington, a young black woman." The circle of guests around them went quiet. All eyes turned to Elijah. For a split second, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. He had a daughter. A daughter he had cast aside. A daughter who had mumbled something about financial technology before he threw her out into the rain. But then his ego took over. His absolute refusal to believe that he could be wrong slammed the door on that possibility. He laughed, a deep, booming sound that was meant to reassure the room, but only highlighted his arrogance. "Aaliyah, you think my daughter Aaliyah is closing $1 billion deal? Do not be absurd." He took a sip of his drink, looking around the circle with a sneer. "Aaliyah could not close a window, let alone a merger. She is currently finding herself in Europe because she lacked the discipline to finish law school. She is likely sleeping in a hostel right now, living off the allowance Dante sends her out of pity. If there is a Washington making headlines, it is my son Dante. He is the financial genius of this family, not the dropout." The guests nodded, playing along with the patriarch. Of course. It made sense. Aaliyah was the failure. Dante was the star. They went back to their drinks, dismissing the rumors as a coincidence. They did not know that the dropout was currently less than a mile away, sitting in a Rolls-Royce that cost more than their houses, coming to prove them all wrong. Elijah had just publicly bet his reputation against my success, and he had lost. The Rolls-Royce Phantom idled in the shadows just beyond the wrought iron gates of the Washington estate. The engine was a silent hum, a predator waiting to pounce. Inside the cabin, the air was cool and smelled of triumph. I poured myself a single glass of Dom Perignon from the car's crystal service. The bubbles rose in a perfect steady stream, mirroring the anticipation rising in my chest. I checked my phone, 11:55 p.m. 5 minutes. 5 minutes until the embargo lifted. 5 minutes until the wire transfer hit. 5 minutes until the name Aaliyah Washington replaced every other topic of conversation in that house. Through the tinted window, I could see the glow of the ballroom. I could see the silhouettes of the guests moving toward the massive television screen that had been set up for the countdown. They were laughing. They were cheering. They were celebrating a year of maintaining the status quo. They were about to witness a revolution. I took a sip of the champagne. It tasted like victory. Cold, crisp, and undeniably expensive. I imagined my father inside holding his scotch, waiting for the market report that would validate his ego. I imagined my mother adjusting her jewelry, waiting for the camera flash. I imagined Dante sweating through his shirt, waiting for a miracle that was never coming. They were all waiting for the future. But the future was sitting outside in a car they probably assumed belonged to a guest driver. I said, my voice calm but laced with a dark amusement. "Yes, Ms. Washington. Change of destination. We are not going to the front door just yet." He looked at me in the rearview mirror, his expression professional but curious. "Where to, ma'am?" "Drive us to the Central Hospital Trauma Center," I said. "The hospital, ma'am? Are you unwell?" "I am perfectly fine," I replied, swirling the champagne in my glass. "But my father is about to have a very bad night. He has a heart condition, you see. And in exactly 5 minutes he is going to see something on that television screen that is going to stop his heart cold. I want to be close by, not to save him, but to make sure he survives long enough to sign the papers." The driver nodded, his face impassive. "Understood, ma'am." He put the car in gear and we pulled away from the gates, leaving the party behind for now. We moved through the quiet streets, the only sound the soft hum of the tires on the pavement. I watched the countdown on my phone. 3 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute. The world was holding its breath. The old year was dying, and with it the old version of me was fading away. The girl who begged, the girl who cried, the girl who was a disappointment. She was gone. In her place sat a billionaire, a shark, a queen. "Happy New Year, Daddy," I whispered to the empty car. "Try not to die before I get there. I have an eviction notice to serve you." Inside the ballroom, the air was vibrating with the kind of manic energy that only exists when rich people convince themselves they have conquered time itself. The crystal chandeliers seemed to shine brighter. The jazz band swelled to a crescendo, drowning out the quiet hum of impending disaster. It was 11:59 p.m., the final 60 seconds of the Washington reign. My father, Judge Elijah Washington, stood at the very center of the room. He looked like a monarch surveying his kingdom. He raised his glass of scotch high, the amber liquid catching the light. He looked at my mother, Dr. Vivian Washington, and in that look was 40 years of shared ambition and ruthless social climbing. They believed they had won. They believed they had successfully pruned the dead branch from their family tree and preserved the perfect fruit. They thought they were untouchable. Next to them, Dante adjusted his cufflinks. The terror that had gripped him earlier in the study had been washed away by the adrenaline of the moment. He looked at the clock. Less than a minute. He told himself that if the police were coming, they would have been here by now. He told himself that the transfer had worked. He reached out and took Courtney's hand. Her diamond bracelet dug into his palm, a sharp reminder of the lifestyle he had stolen to maintain. She leaned into him, whispering something about the yacht they would buy. They stood there, a tableau of American success. The banker and the socialite. The future of the dynasty. The massive screen above the fireplace switched to the live feed from Times Square. The ball was dropping. The room erupted into a chant. 10, 9, 8. I could imagine the sound vibrating through the floorboards. I could feel the collective breath of 200 people waiting for the release of the new year. They were counting down to champagne and kisses. They were counting down to another year of dividends and garden parties. 7, 6, 5. Elijah pulled Vivian close. He whispered in her ear, "We did it, Vivian. Another perfect year." She smiled a smile that was all teeth and triumph. They were so sure of their standing. They were so sure that their walls were high enough to keep out the reality I had built. 4, 3, 2. Dante squeezed his wife's hand tight. He closed his eyes. He made a silent wish to a god he did not believe in, thanking the universe for letting him get away with it. He thought the slate was being wiped clean. He thought the new year brought a fresh start. 1. The shout was deafening. Happy New Year. Confetti cannons blasted gold paper into the air. Couples embraced. Glasses clinked. For a single heartbeat, the Washington family stood at the pinnacle of their existence, bathed in golden light and adulation. They were the kings and queens of Atlanta. And then the screen flickered. The fireworks erupted over the Atlanta skyline, painting the night in bursts of crimson and gold. Inside the Washington estate, the cheers reached a fever pitch. Champagne corks popped in a synchronized volley that sounded like gunfire. For exactly 3 seconds, my family lived in a world where they were the undisputed royalty of Buckhead. They hugged, they kissed, they toasted to another year of dominance. Then the massive projection screen above the fireplace shifted. The image of the Times Square ball dissolved. The feed cut to the stark red and white graphics of a CNN special report. The breaking news alert sound, that urgent electronic pulse that signals a war or a disaster, sliced through the jazz music. The volume had been turned up for the countdown, so the anchor's voice boomed across the ballroom, drowning out the applause. Breaking news out of the financial sector tonight. In a stunning midnight announcement, Global Bank has confirmed the acquisition of the Atlanta-based fintech startup Credit Flow. The room did not go silent immediately. There was a moment of confusion. Guests looked around, wondering why the party playlist had been interrupted by business news. My father frowned, lowering his glass, annoyed that his moment had been stepped on. Dante looked at the screen, blinking through his alcohol haze, assuming it was a glitch. Then my face appeared. It was not the photo they kept in the family album, the one of an awkward teenager with braces. It was my professional headshot taken last month by a photographer who usually shoots for Vogue. I looked powerful. I looked unshakable. I looked like money. The anchor continued, his voice breathless with the magnitude of the scoop. The deal, valued at $1.2 billion in cash and stock, makes Credit Flow the largest unicorn exit in the state's history, and it propels the company's sole founder and CEO, Aaliyah Washington, into the history books. The chyron at the bottom of the screen scrolled in bright yellow letters. Aaliyah Washington becomes youngest self-made female billionaire in Georgia history. The silence that fell over the ballroom then was absolute. It was a vacuum. It sucked the air out of the lungs of 200 people. The confetti was still drifting down from the ceiling, landing on frozen shoulders and gaping mouths. I watched the broadcast on the screen in the back of the Rolls-Royce, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm against my ribs. I heard the anchor say my name again. Aaliyah Washington, not Judge Washington's daughter, not Dante's little sister, just Aaliyah Washington, the billionaire. In the ballroom, the guests turned. 200 heads swiveled in unison away from the screen and toward my parents. They looked at Elijah, whose face had gone the color of ash. They looked at Vivian, whose hand was clutching her pearl necklace as if she were choking. They looked at Dante, who was staring at the screen with the expression of a man watching a tsunami crest over his head. The whispering started low at first, like the rustle of dry leaves, then growing into a roar. "Did he say billion? Is that Elijah's daughter?" I thought she was in Paris. I thought she was a student. $1.2 billion. The narrative my parents had spent 5 years constructing, the lies about my failure, the stories about my instability, the fiction of my mediocrity, it all disintegrated in 10 seconds of airtime. The truth was out, and it was wearing a $10,000 suit and holding the deed to their lives. They were no longer the Washingtons. They were just Aaliyah Washington's relatives. The silence inside the ballroom was shattered by a single sharp sound. It was the sound of my father's heavy crystal Scotch glass slipping from his fingers and hitting the marble floor. The expensive amber liquid splashed onto his polished tuxedo shoes and the hem of my mother's gold gown, but Elijah Washington did not notice. He did not move. He did not blink. His eyes were locked on the television screen, specifically on the number that was burning itself into his retinas like a brand. $1.2 billion. For Elijah, money had always been more than currency. It was his religion. It was the yardstick he used to measure a man's soul. He had spent 65 years climbing the social ladder, clawing his way into rooms where he was merely tolerated, accumulating influence, and preening over a net worth that was respectable in Atlanta, but insignificant on the global stage. He had built a fortress of arrogance around himself, believing he was the sun around which our family orbited. He had convinced himself that his way was the only way. Now he was staring at a figure that eclipsed his entire existence. His daughter, the girl he had thrown out into the rain with nothing but a duffel bag, the girl he had called a merchant, the girl he had erased from his life because she did not fit his narrow definition of success. That girl was now worth more than everyone in that room combined. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. It was not just shock, it was a complete and violent dismantling of his reality. Every insult he had hurled at me, every time he had sneered at my coding, every moment he had spent apologizing for my absence rushed back to him in a suffocating wave. He realized with a terrifying clarity that he had discarded a diamond to hoard stones. He had bet against his own blood, and he had lost in the most public, humiliating way possible. His hand went to his chest, clutching the silk lapel of his tuxedo. It started as a tremor, a slight shaking of the fingers that had just been raised in a toast to his own greatness. Then his face began to change color. The flush of triumph drained away instantly, leaving a sickly gray pallor that deepened rapidly into a terrifying shade of purple. He gasped, his mouth opening like a fish out of water, but no sound came out. The air in the room seemed too thin to reach his lungs. The pain was likely excruciating, but the blow to his ego was fatal. Elijah! Vivian screamed, her voice shrill and terrifying, cutting through the stunned atmosphere of the room. She reached for him, her hands grasping at his arm, but she was too late. His knees buckled. The great Judge Elijah Washington, the patriarch, the man who never showed weakness, crumbled before the eyes of the elite he tried so hard to impress. He did not fall gracefully. He collapsed like a controlled demolition, imploding under the weight of his own hubris. He hit the floor with a heavy thud that seemed to vibrate through the soles of the guests' shoes. Panic erupted instantly. The guests who seconds ago had been whispering about my success were now screaming. A woman near the front dropped her clutch. Someone shouted for a doctor. The senator backed away, his face pale, his political instincts kicking in as he tried to distance himself from the unfolding tragedy. Dante stood frozen, staring down at his father, his mind unable to process whether this was a disaster or a dark reprieve from his own looming execution. I watched the feed from the car, the scene playing out in high definition. I saw my mother drop to her knees, her gold gown pooling around her husband's still form. I saw the waiters rushing forward with napkins, as if linen could stop a heart attack. I saw the end of the Washington dynasty. "Driver," I said quietly, my voice cutting through the silence of the Rolls-Royce. "Get us to the hospital. He is going to need a very expensive cardiologist. And fortunately for him, I am the only one who can afford the bill." My mother, Dr. Vivian Washington, was a woman who prided herself on composure. She had built her entire life around the concept of presentation. In her world, a cracked vase was a tragedy, and a public display of emotion was a sin. But as she knelt on the marble floor beside her husband's collapsing body, her perfectly constructed mask shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. She looked down at Elijah, gasping for air, his hand clutching his chest. Then her eyes darted up to the massive screen where my face was still beaming in high definition. The chyron beneath my image read, "Self-made billionaire." The number 1.2 billion seemed to pulse in the room, mocking her. For a split second, the greed in her eyes overpowered the panic. The survival instinct of a social climber kicked in, overriding the concern of a wife. She forgot about the man dying on her floor. She forgot about the guests screaming for a doctor. She only saw the headline. She saw the power. She saw the redemption of her reputation. "That is my daughter," she screamed, her voice cracking and shrill. "That is Aaliyah. I told you she was brilliant. I told you she was destined for greatness. That is my baby." She looked around the room, searching for validation. She wanted the guests to applaud. She wanted them to envy her womb for producing such wealth. She expected the senator to lean down and congratulate her. She expected Courtney to rush over and hug her. She thought she could pivot. She thought she could rewrite 5 years of rejection in 5 seconds. But the room did not applaud. The room recoiled. The guests who were standing closest to her took a collective step back. These were people who had listened to her disparage me for years. They had heard her tell the senator I was in Paris just 20 minutes ago. They had heard her whisper to the bishop's wife that I was mentally unstable and unemployable. They had watched her nod in agreement when Courtney mocked my poverty on the live stream. The senator's wife, a woman whose approval Vivian craved more than oxygen, looked down at my mother with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. "I thought you said she was a disappointment, Vivian," the woman said, her voice cutting through the panic like ice. "You said she was lost in Europe. You said we should not mention her name because it upset Elijah. Were you lying to us, Vivian? Or did you simply not know that your own daughter was the most successful person in this room?" The question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Other guests began to whisper. Their shock at my success was quickly replaced by a realization of my parents' deceit. They realized they had been played. They realized the Washingtons were not a dynasty. They were frauds who had discarded their most valuable asset. Vivian opened her mouth to argue, to spin another lie, but no words came out. She looked at the faces surrounding her. She saw the judgment. She saw the loss of respect. She realized in that terrifying moment that she had committed the one unforgivable sin in their social circle. She had been exposed as a fake. She looked back down at Elijah, who was now unconscious. She realized she was alone. Her son was a thief, her husband was dying, and the daughter she tried to claim was $1 billion out of reach. She slumped forward, her gold dress pooling around her like a tarnished crown. The silence of the room was louder than any scream. She had lost everything. And the worst part was, she knew I was watching. The chaos in the ballroom was a deafening roar of panic and confusion, but for Dante Washington, the world had gone completely silent. He stood frozen amidst the swirling crowd, his eyes locked on the massive projection screen that was still broadcasting his sister's triumph. The chyron scrolled relentlessly. Global bank acquires credit flow, $1.2 billion. The words global bank burned into his retinas like a laser. To everyone else in the room, it was just a name, a faceless financial institution with deep pockets. But to Dante, it was the name on the letterhead that had been arriving at his office with increasing frequency. It was the name on the mortgage documents he had secretly signed, forging his father's signature to secure the high-interest loans he needed to cover his gambling losses. His mind raced, connecting dots he had been too arrogant to see before. Global Bank held the primary lien on the Washington estate. Global Bank managed the family trust he had just emptied. And now Global Bank was in bed with Aaliyah. A cold sweat broke out over his entire body, soaking his tuxedo shirt instantly. He realized with a sickening clarity that his sister had not just sold a company. She had bought her way into the very heart of the financial system that held his life together. As the new star of their portfolio as a board member or a major shareholder, she would have access. She would see the audits. She would see the irregularities. She would see his name on documents that should never have existed. He looked at his father lying on the floor surrounded by frantic guests. He looked at his mother screaming for help. But he could not move to help them. His legs felt like lead. He was trapped in a nightmare of his own making. The $5 million he had stolen from the trust, the wire transfer that had failed, it was all going to be exposed. And the person holding the magnifying glass would be the sister he had mocked for eating noodles. A notification popped up on his phone screen. It was an automated alert from his firm's compliance software. Account frozen, pending internal audit, Global Bank Compliance Division. He dropped the phone. It clattered onto the marble floor, cracking the screen. It was happening. It was happening right now. Aaliyah wasn't waiting until Monday. She wasn't waiting for business hours. She had triggered the audit the moment the deal closed. She knew. She knew everything. Dante looked around the room wild-eyed. The faces of the guests seemed to distort into masks of judgment. They knew him as the golden boy, the genius, the heir. Soon they would know him as a fraud, a thief, a felon. He felt a hand on his arm and jumped violently. It was Courtney looking at him with wide, terrified eyes. "Dante," she hissed. "What is happening? Why is everyone looking at us? Do something." He pulled his arm away from her, revulsion rising in his throat. She was wearing the diamond bracelet he had bought with stolen money. She was part of the weight that was dragging him down. He couldn't speak. He couldn't explain. He backed away from her, stumbling over the hem of a lady's gown. He had to talk to Aaliyah. He had to beg. It was the only option left. The arrogance that had fueled him for 30 years evaporated, leaving behind a terrified child who had broken a vase and was waiting for the punishment. He scrambled for his phone, picking it up with shaking hands. His thumb hovered over her name. The sister he had blocked. The sister he had insulted. She was no longer just his sister. She was his judge, his jury, and his executioner. And the trial had already begun. My phone vibrated against the leather armrest of the Rolls-Royce. The screen lit up with a photo of Dante from his college graduation, smiling and arrogant in his cap and gown. It was a stark contrast to the man I was currently watching on the live feed, trembling in the middle of a ballroom catastrophe. I picked up the device. I did not speak. I let the silence stretch across the connection, a void waiting to be filled by his panic. "Aaliyah." His voice was unrecognizable. It was high and thin, cracking with a terror that stripped away all his polished banker veneer. "What did you do? What did you do to us? Dad is on the floor. He is clutching his chest. He is not breathing right. You killed him. Are you happy now? You killed him with your ego." I looked out the window at the passing streetlights. They blurred into streaks of white and yellow. I felt a flicker of emotion, but it was not guilt. It was a cold, detached pity. "I did not kill him, Dante," I replied, my voice calm and measured. "The truth killed him. He built a glass house and was surprised when it shattered under the weight of reality. If he is having a cardiac event, I suggest you stop screaming at me and call 911. The paramedics can save his heart, but they cannot save his reputation." "You are a monster," he sobbed. "How can you be so cold? He is your father." "He was my father until 5 years ago," I corrected him. "Now he is just a man who owes me a lot of money. And speaking of debts, Dante, we need to discuss yours." There was a pause on the line. The sound of his heavy breathing filled the silence. "What are you talking about?" he whispered. "I am talking about the $5 million you transferred from the family trust 2 hours ago," I said. "I am talking about the high-interest lien you signed against the estate with a man named Vinny. Did you really think I would buy the bank and not check the ledger? I see everything, Dante. I see the gambling debts. I see the embezzlement. I see the fraud." He made a choking sound. "Please, Aaliyah, you cannot tell them. Not now. It would destroy Mom. Mom is already destroyed, I said. She just found out her golden ticket is a counterfeit. But you can still save yourself from prison. I am 5 minutes away. I am coming to the hospital. But before you get in that ambulance, I want you to go into Dad's study. I want you to open the safe. You know the combination. I want you to take out the deed to the estate. Why? He asked, his voice trembling. Because you are going to sign it over to me, I said. That is the price of my silence. That is the price of keeping you out of federal prison tonight. Bring the papers to the emergency room, Dante. Do not make me ask twice. I hung up the phone. The car turned a corner and the lights of the hospital emergency bay came into view. It was time to go to work. I checked my reflection in the rear-view mirror. I did not look like a grieving daughter. I looked like a foreclosure agent. And I was right on time. Amidst the screaming guests and the wail of approaching sirens, Courtney Vance Washington stood like a deer caught in the headlights of a semi-truck. Her father-in-law was dying on the floor, and her husband was having a mental breakdown, but Courtney was consumed by a much more immediate crisis. She was watching her social status evaporate in real time. The survival instinct of the desperate social climber kicked in, overriding any sense of decency or shame. She needed to pivot. She needed to rewrite the narrative before the night ended. She turned to Mrs. Abernathy, the bishop's wife, who was clutching her pearls and staring at the television screen in shock. Courtney forced a smile onto her face, a rictus of terror that looked more like a grimace. Her voice was high and breathless, trembling with a manic energy. "Oh, you know how sisters are," she stammered, waving her hand dismissively as if the last 3 hours had not happened. "We fight, but we love each other. It is just our little dynamic. Honestly, I was the first one to know about the deal. Aaliyah told me weeks ago. I just had to keep it a secret for regulatory reasons. We are practically best friends. I was just teasing her earlier. It was an inside joke." Mrs. Abernathy looked at Courtney. She did not blink. She did not smile back. Her expression was one of pure, unadulterated revulsion. She looked at Courtney as if she were a stain on the expensive carpet. "An inside joke," Mrs. Abernathy repeated, her tone dripping with ice. "You called her a failure, Courtney. You said she was dead weight. We all heard you. And more importantly, so did they." She pointed a manicured finger at Courtney's left hand. Courtney looked down. She was still holding her phone. The screen was lit up. The live stream she had started earlier, the one where she had mocked Aaliyah's empty chair and laughed at her poverty, was still active. She had forgotten to end the broadcast. The phone had been running, capturing every lie, every insult, and every moment of her humiliation. Courtney raised the phone to her face, her hands shaking so hard the image blurred. The viewer count had exploded. It was not just the 50 wives from her social circle anymore. It was thousands of people. The news of the acquisition had driven traffic to anything related to the Washington name, and the comments were scrolling by faster than she could read them. "Look at this clown trying to backpedal. We have the receipts, lady. The internet is forever. She is trying to switch sides so fast she is going to get whiplash. Aaliyah needs to sue her for defamation. Imagine being this jealous of your billionaire sister-in-law. You are finished in Atlanta." The words burned into her eyes. Stupid, fake, gold digger, liar. The emojis were even worse. Clowns, trash cans, snakes. It was a digital firing squad, and she was standing against the wall without a blindfold. Courtney frantically tapped the screen trying to end the video, but her fingers were slippery with sweat. She fumbled the device and it clattered to the floor, landing screen up. The comments kept scrolling, a relentless waterfall of judgment. She looked up, hoping to find a sympathetic face in the ballroom. There were none. The women she had tried so hard to impress were turning their backs on her. They were whispering behind their hands, their eyes darting between her and the phone on the floor. She realized with a sinking dread that she was radioactive. She wasn't just the wife of a fraud. She was a public laughingstock. The internet had already archived the clip of her sneering at the empty chair. By morning it would be a meme. By noon she would be a pariah. She backed away until she hit the wall, her chest heaving. She wanted to scream that it wasn't fair that she was the victim here, but the cold blue light of the phone on the floor told the only truth that mattered. She had played the game of appearances and she had lost to a girl who didn't even bother to show up. The night air outside the Washington estate was torn apart by the discordant shriek of sirens. The flashing red and white lights of the ambulance painted the manicured hedges in strokes of violent color, creating a strobe effect that made the scene look like a horror movie. Paramedics moved with a brutal efficiency, hoisting the stretcher that carried the limp body of Judge Elijah Washington into the back of the waiting vehicle. It was a scene devoid of dignity. His tuxedo shirt was cut open, exposing his chest to the cold night air, and an oxygen mask covered the face that had spent decades looking down on others. My mother, Dr. Vivian Washington, stumbled alongside the stretcher. She had lost one of her gold heels in the grass and was limping, her expensive gown torn at the hem. Her hair was wild, her makeup streaked with tears and sweat. She looked small and pathetic, stripped of the armor of her social standing. She reached out toward the closing doors of the ambulance, crying out my father's name, but the paramedic gently pushed her back, telling her she had to follow in her own vehicle. She was left standing on the curb, shivering and alone, the exhaust of the ambulance blowing into her face. At that exact moment, the darkness of the driveway was pierced by a different kind of light. The blinding white xenon headlights of my convoy cut through the chaos. The 3 black Escalades led the way, pushing through the crowd of stunned guests who had spilled out onto the lawn. Behind them, the silver Rolls-Royce Phantom glided forward like a shark moving through deep water. It did not speed up. It did not slow down. It moved with the inevitable momentum of fate. As the Rolls-Royce pulled level with the curb where my mother stood, I pressed the button on the armrest. The heavy tinted glass slid down silently. The sounds of the night, the sirens, the sobbing, the murmurs of the crowd rushed into the cabin, but they did not touch me. I sat in the temperature-controlled silence, my diamonds catching the reflection of the ambulance lights. My mother looked up, her eyes locked onto mine. For a moment, time seemed to suspend. She saw the daughter she had birthed. She saw the child she had ignored. She saw the woman she had betrayed. I saw her mouth open. I saw the recognition flash across her face, followed by a desperate, pleading hope. She took a step toward the car, her hand reaching out as if she could grab onto my success and pull herself out of the wreckage of her life. "Aaliyah," she choked out. "Baby, please." I looked at her. I did not smile. I did not frown. I simply observed her like a scientist studying a specimen under a microscope. I took in the desperation in her posture and the fear in her eyes. I remembered all the times I had reached out to her begging for love, begging for support, and finding only cold indifference. Now the roles were reversed. She was the one in the cold, and I was the one behind the glass. I did not tell the driver to stop. I did not unlock the door. I did not offer her a ride to the hospital. She had made it clear that my absence was a gift, so I was giving her exactly what she asked for. I watched her hand fall back to her side as she realized I was not stopping. The hope in her eyes died, replaced by the crushing weight of consequences. "Drive on," I said to the driver, my voice devoid of emotion. The window slid back up, sealing me away from her. The Rolls-Royce accelerated smoothly, leaving my mother standing alone on the curb in the cloud of dust we left behind. We headed toward the hospital, not to offer comfort, but to close the deal. The rearview mirror showed her shrinking into the distance, a gold speck in the darkness, but I did not look back for long. I had a future to attend to, and she was now firmly part of the past. The sliding glass doors of the Central Hospital Trauma Center parted with a soft pneumatic hiss, admitting the cool night air and the scent of antiseptic. I stepped across the threshold, and the atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. Usually an emergency room is a place of chaos and egalitarian misery, where the rich and the poor wait in the same plastic chairs. But tonight the rules of the universe had bent around me. I did not walk in as a worried daughter rushing to the bedside of a sick parent. I walked in as a benefactor. I walked in as a force of nature. Two of my security guards flanked me, clearing a path through the crowded waiting area. The murmurs of the patients died down as they took in the sight of a woman in a midnight blue couture gown and diamonds striding across the linoleum floor. I did not look at the triage nurse. I did not look at the intake desk. I looked straight ahead to where a gray-haired man in a white coat was rushing toward me. It was Dr. Aris, the chief of medicine. He looked winded, as if he had run all the way from his office on the top floor. He stopped a few feet in front of me and bowed his head slightly, a gesture of respect that bordered on reverence. "Ms. Washington," he said, his voice breathless. "I was notified immediately of your arrival. On behalf of the hospital board, I want to thank you for the generous endowment to the cardiology wing that cleared just moments ago. Your donation is unprecedented." I stopped and looked at him. I had authorized the transfer from the car, $10 million. It was a drop in the bucket of my new fortune, but it bought me something money usually could not buy in a hospital: control. "Thank you, Dr. Aris," I said, my voice smooth and calm. "I assume my father is receiving the best care available." The chief nodded vigorously. "Absolutely. We have him stabilized in a private suite in the ICU. He is conscious but weak. We were just about to update the family." He gestured toward the far corner of the waiting room. I followed his gaze. There, huddled together in a cluster of uncomfortable orange plastic chairs, was the Washington dynasty. They looked like the survivors of a shipwreck. My mother sat in the center, her gold dress stained with grass and dirt, her face streaked with mascara. She was shivering, staring blankly at the floor. Next to her, Dante sat with his head in his hands, his tuxedo jacket missing, his shirt unbuttoned and damp with sweat. Courtney was curled up in the chair beside him, scrolling frantically on her phone, her face illuminated by the blue light of her own social destruction. They looked small. They looked ordinary. Under the harsh, unforgiving glare of the fluorescent hospital lights, the glamour was gone. There was no jazz band here to drown out the silence. There were no waiters to bring them champagne. There was just the cold, hard reality of their situation. They looked up as Dr. Aris pointed in their direction. When their eyes landed on me, I saw a collective flinch. They did not see a savior. They saw the executioner arriving to read the sentence. I turned back to Dr. Aris, ignoring their pathetic stares. "Excellent," I said. "Take me to him, and bring them along. We have family business to conclude, and I do not want to keep the patient waiting." I began to walk toward the elevators, the chief of medicine falling into step beside me. I could hear the scraping of chairs as my family scrambled to follow. They trailed behind me at a distance, a ragged procession of failures, following the only success they had ever produced. I did not wait for them. I pressed the button for the elevator and watched the numbers climb. The ascent was just beginning. The elevator doors slid open, revealing the sterile white corridor of the intensive care unit. My mother did not wait for me to step out. She had been pacing the hallway like a caged animal, and the moment she saw me, she lunged forward. Her movements were jagged and desperate, stripping away the last remnants of her composed facade. She reached out, grabbing my forearm with a grip that was trembling yet surprisingly strong. Her eyes were wide and bloodshot, rimmed with the black smudges of ruined mascara. "Aaliyah, baby, thank God you are here," she cried out, her voice echoing uncomfortably in the quiet ward. "The doctors just told us. It is critical. He needs a quadruple bypass immediately. They want to fly in a specialist from Boston, but the insurance is stalling. They need a deposit. A huge one. You have to help us. You have to save your father." She looked at me, searching for the little girl who used to crave her approval. She was looking for the daughter who would do anything for a scrap of affection. She did not realize that girl had died years ago, buried under the weight of their rejection. I looked down at her hand, clutching the sleeve of my couture gown. It felt heavy and intrusive. I did not pull away violently. Instead, I reached up and peeled her fingers off my arm one by one with a slow, deliberate coolness. I stepped back, creating a physical distance between us that felt like an ocean. I smoothed the silk of my sleeve, staring at her until she shrank back against the wall. "I will pay for it," I said, my voice flat and devoid of warmth. I will authorize the transfer for the surgery and the specialist. I will cover the private room and the rehabilitation. Vivian let out a sob of relief, her knees buckling slightly. Oh, thank you, Aaliyah. I knew you still loved him. I knew you would not let anger get in the way of family. I laughed. It was a short, sharp sound that lacked any humor. It stopped her tears instantly. Do not misunderstand me, Vivian, I said, stepping closer to her, forcing her to look into my eyes. I am not doing this for you. And I am certainly not doing it because I love him. If I loved him, I might let him die tonight. Death would be a mercy for him. It would be a quick exit before the real pain begins. I gestured toward the double doors of the ICU where my father lay hooked up to machines. I am paying for this surgery because I refuse to let him escape that easily. I do not want him to die believing he is a victim of stress. I want him to survive. I want him to wake up. I want his heart to beat strong enough so that he can sit up in bed and watch me tear down everything he built. I want him to be fully conscious when I evict him from his home. I want him to be alive when the world finds out his son is a thief. I want him to live long enough to realize that the only reason he is breathing is because the daughter he called a failure wrote a check he could not afford. My mother stared at me in horror, her hand flying to her mouth. You are cruel, she whispered. I am a businessman, I corrected her. And I am protecting my investment. He owes me a life of apologies, and I intend to collect every single one of them. Now move out of my way. I have a patient to visit. I walked past her, leaving her trembling in the hallway. I did not look back. I had just bought my father's life, and now I owned him completely. I turned my attention from the weeping woman in the hallway to the man huddled in the corner. Dante Washington. My big brother. The golden child. The man who had spent his entire life looking down on me from a pedestal built on our parents' delusions was now trying to make himself invisible in a plastic hospital chair. He looked wretched. His tuxedo shirt was stained with sweat, and the expensive silk tie hung loosely around his neck, like a noose he had tied himself. Marcus stepped forward from the shadows of the corridor and handed me a thick manila envelope. It was heavy. It contained the autopsy of Dante's career. I walked over to him, the sound of my heels clicking sharply on the linoleum floor. Dante looked up, his eyes wide with the terror of a trapped animal. He started to stand up, perhaps to offer a defense or a lie, but I did not give him the chance. I threw the file. I did not toss it gently. I hurled it with all the force of 5 years of suppressed anger. The heavy envelope struck him square in the chest with a dull thud. The clasp broke open and papers exploded everywhere, scattering across the floor like confetti. Spreadsheets, bank transfer records, screenshots of cryptocurrency wallets. The forensic evidence of his crime lay exposed under the harsh fluorescent lights for everyone to see. Look at it, Dante, I said, my voice low and lethal. Look at your legacy. That is the paper trail you thought you could hide. $5 million stolen from the family trust. 3 counts of wire fraud, embezzlement, elder abuse. And let us not forget the forgery you committed to secure the loan against the house. Dante scrambled to pick up the pages, his hands shaking so violently he tore one of the bank statements. He stared at the numbers, the red ink that marked his ruin. He looked up at me, and his face was pale as death. How, he whispered. How did you get this? I own the bank, Dante, I replied. I own the servers where you hid your digital footprints. I own the compliance team that flagged your account. I have enough here to put you in a federal penitentiary for 20 years. Imagine it. You, the soft banker in a cell. You would not last a week. He made a choking sound, a sob stuck in his throat. Aaliyah, please, you cannot do that. I am your brother. It would kill Mom. I took a step closer, towering over him. Mom is irrelevant. This is about you and me. You have 2 choices. Option 1 is, I hand this file to the FBI agent who is currently on speed dial in my pocket. You go to prison, you lose your license, you become a felon. I let the threat hang in the air for an agonizing second. Or option 2. Dante dropped the papers. He slid off the chair and fell to his knees right there on the dirty hospital floor. He grabbed the hem of my couture gown, his knuckles white. He did not care that people were watching. He did not care about his dignity. He was begging for his life. Anything, he sobbed, tears streaming down his face. I will do anything, Aaliyah. Please do not send me to jail. I will sign whatever you want. I will go away. Just please save me. I looked down at him with cold detachment. He looked so small. The giant who had cast a shadow over my life was just a man on his knees. Get up, I commanded. You are embarrassing yourself. You are going to sign the deed to the estate over to me. You are going to sign over your power of attorney. You are going to resign from your firm. You belong to me now, Dante. And I have a lot of work for you to do. Dante scrambled to his feet, wiping the tears from his face with the back of his hand like a chastised child. He looked down at the floor, unable to meet my gaze, his shame radiating off him in waves. My mother stood against the wall, her hand covering her mouth, her eyes darting between her broken son and me. She looked like she was waiting for a punchline that would never come. She thought the worst was over. She thought that because I had agreed to pay the hospital bills, and because I had spared Dante from immediate arrest, that the mercy would continue. She was wrong. Mercy was for people who deserved it. This was an eviction. I motioned for Marcus to step forward again. He pulled a second document from his briefcase. It was a formal notice of foreclosure stamped with the seal of Global Bank. I held it up so they could all see the red lettering. There is one final matter we need to settle tonight, I said, my voice filling the silence of the waiting room. It concerns the Washington estate. The house you are so proud of. The house where you threw a party tonight to celebrate a success you did not earn. Vivian took a step forward, her brow furrowed. What about the house? That is our home, Aaliyah. Your father built that house. He did build it, I replied. And then your son mortgaged it. And then he defaulted on the payments. And then he signed a predatory lien against it to cover his gambling debts. As of midnight tonight, when I acquired the bank, I also acquired its distressed assets. And the Washington estate is the most distressed asset on the books. I took a step closer, my voice dropping to a hard, uncompromising tone. The bank has initiated immediate foreclosure proceedings. The title has already been transferred to a holding company under my control. You are no longer homeowners, you are squatters. The color drained from Vivian's face completely, leaving her looking like a ghost. Squatter, she whispered the word foreign on her tongue. You have until 8 a.m. tomorrow morning to vacate the premises. I continued, checking my watch. That gives you exactly 7 hours. I suggest you go back there and start packing. Take your clothes. Take your personal items. Leave the furniture. Leave the art. Leave anything of value that can be liquidated to pay back the millions Dante stole. Courtney, who had been sobbing quietly in the chair, suddenly let out a high-pitched shriek that made the triage nurse look up in alarm. She flew out of her seat, her face contorted with panic. No, she screamed, rushing toward me. You cannot do this. You cannot kick us out. Where am I supposed to go? I have a brunch scheduled for Sunday. I have fittings. All my things are in that closet. Do you know how much my wardrobe is worth? You cannot just throw me on the street like a beggar. She grabbed my arm, her nails digging into the fabric of my gown. I looked down at her hand with disgust. 2 security guards stepped forward, immediately pulling her back. She flailed against them, kicking and screaming like a toddler having a tantrum. I am a Washington, she wailed. I am a Washington. We do not live in motels. We do not get evicted. This is insane. Aaliyah, please. I will be nice to you. I will post whatever you want. Just let us keep the house. I looked at her fighting against the guards, her dignity completely gone. She was worried about her brunch, while her father-in-law was fighting for his life. You are not a Washington anymore, Courtney, I said coldly. You are just a woman with a maxed-out credit card and nowhere to sleep. I suggest you call your parents. Hopefully they have a guest room. because at 8:01 a.m., my security team is changing the locks. And if you are still inside, you will be arrested for trespassing. I turned back to my mother and brother. You heard me. 8 a.m. Do not test me. I have taken your company. I have taken your reputation. Do not make me take your freedom too. Now get out of my sight. I turned my back on them, walking toward the ICU doors. Behind me, Courtney's screams echoed off the sterile walls, a fitting soundtrack to the collapse of their empire. They had 7 hours to pack 30 years of lies into cardboard boxes. I had a father to visit. The security guards released their grip on Courtney, and she stumbled back, smoothing her disheveled dress with trembling hands. She looked at me with a mixture of fear and defiance, the look of a cornered rat that still thinks it has sharp teeth. She opened her mouth to speak, probably to threaten me with a lawyer or a social media campaign, but I cut her off with a single step forward. My presence in the narrow hospital corridor was suffocating, consuming all the oxygen in the room. You called me poor Courtney, I said, my voice low and steady. You sat at my parents' dinner table eating food paid for with stolen money, and you laughed at my empty chair. You told thousands of strangers on the internet that I was dead weight. You built your entire personality around being better than me, around being the wealthy, sophisticated wife of the golden child. You defined yourself by the balance in a bank account you did not earn. I looked her up and down, letting my gaze linger on the diamond bracelet she was still wearing, the one Dante had bought with the funds he embezzled from the family trust. Look at you now, I continued. You are standing in a hospital hallway, in a dress you can no longer afford, wearing jewelry that technically belongs to the bank. You are not wealthy, Courtney. You are destitute. You have no assets. You have no home. You have nothing. Courtney let out a wet, hysterical laugh. You cannot touch me, she spat. I am Dante's wife. California is a community property state. Even if you take the house, I get half of everything else. We are a team. He will never let you do this to me. She turned to Dante, who was still kneeling on the floor staring at the linoleum tiles. Dante, tell her, she screamed. Tell her we are going to fight this. Tell her you love me. Dante did not look up. He did not move. He seemed to shrink into himself, trying to disappear entirely. I shook my head slowly. You really do not understand how survival works, do you, Courtney? There is no team. There is only the person who sinks and the person who swims. I signaled to Marcus. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was not a long document. It did not need to be. Dante had a choice to make tonight. I said, my voice devoid of pity. I offered him a deal. I told him I would keep the evidence of his fraud out of the hands of the FBI. I told him I would not press charges for the theft, but in exchange he had to give me total control. He had to liquidate everything. And that included his liabilities. I took the paper from Marcus and held it up. You are a liability, Courtney. You are expensive, you are loud, and you are a public relations nightmare. Dante knows that he cannot rebuild his life with you hanging around his neck like an anchor, so he made a trade, his freedom for your marriage. Courtney stared at the paper. It was a petition for divorce citing irreconcilable differences. At the bottom, the ink was still wet on Dante's signature. He signed it 5 minutes ago, I said. He sold you out to save his own skin. You are not Mrs. Washington anymore. You are just Courtney, and Courtney is trespassing in my hospital. She looked at Dante, her face crumbling as the reality hit her. He had not just lost the money. He had discarded her. The betrayal was absolute. She let out a sound that was half scream, half sob, a raw noise of pure devastation. Get out of my sight, I said, pointing toward the exit. Go find a lawyer. Go find a friend. I do not care where you go, but you are done here. If I see you near my family again, I will have you arrested for harassment. And this time, I will make sure the live stream is running so the whole world can watch you get handcuffed. Courtney looked at me, then at Dante's, turned back. She realized she had lost. She turned and ran toward the sliding doors, her heels clicking frantically on the floor, fleeing the wreckage of the life she thought she owned. I watched her go, feeling nothing but the cold satisfaction of a debt finally paid in full. The rhythmic beeping of the cardiac monitor was the only sound in the private suite. It was a mechanical metronome counting out the remaining seconds of a man's pride. I stood by the window looking down at the parking lot where my Rolls-Royce waited like a loyal beast. Behind me, I heard the rustle of stiff hospital sheets. Judge Elijah Washington was waking up. I turned slowly. He looked small in the hospital bed. The tubes and wires attached to his chest made him look like a broken appliance being kept alive by sheer force of will. His eyes fluttered open, adjusting to the dim light. They scanned the room frantically at first, looking for the familiar comforts of his power. Then they landed on me. He did not see his daughter. He saw the midnight blue couture gown. He saw the diamond necklace glinting in the semi-darkness. He saw the $1.2 billion standing at the foot of his bed. Aaliyah. He croaked, his voice a dry husk of its former booming authority. He tried to lift his hand, but it was too heavy. He managed a weak, trembling smile. My daughter. The billionaire. I knew it. I always knew you had it in you. He paused to cough, a wet, rattling sound that shook his frail frame. I was hard on you, Aaliyah. He continued, his eyes shining with a desperate, manipulative warmth. But I had to be. Diamonds are made under pressure. I pushed you because I saw your potential. I am so proud of you. I walked to the side of the bed. I did not take his hand. I leaned down until my face was inches from his. I could smell the antiseptic and the sour scent of fear on his skin. Stop it, I whispered, my voice cutting through the air like a scalpel. Do not insult my intelligence, Elijah. You are not proud of me. You are relieved. You are calculating. You are lying there looking at me, and you are not seeing your child. You are seeing a bailout. You are seeing a way to keep your country club membership and your reputation. I straightened up, smoothing the silk of my dress. If I had walked in here tonight wearing jeans and holding a minimum wage paycheck, you would have told the security guards to remove me. You would have been ashamed. The only difference between the daughter you rejected and the daughter you are praising is the number of zeros in my bank account. Your love is a transaction, and I am closing the account. His smile faltered, his eyes widening in confusion. But Aaliyah, we are family. No, I said firmly. We are strangers who share a blood type. But I am not a monster. I will not leave you on the street. I have arranged for you and Vivian to be transferred to the Golden Oak Assisted Living Facility in the morning. It is clean. It is safe. And it is paid for. You will have a roof over your head and 3 meals a day. I turned toward the door, my silhouette framed by the hallway light. That is my final act of charity toward you. The house is gone. The trust is empty. The legacy is dead. Enjoy your retirement, Judge. But do not ever call me your daughter again. You lost that right the moment you chose your ego over my existence. Goodbye, Elijah. The silver Rolls-Royce glided away from the hospital, leaving the wreckage of the Washington dynasty in the rearview mirror. But the night was not over yet. There was one promise left to keep. We drove through the quiet streets back toward the estate, but we did not go to the main gate where the police lights were still flashing. We went to the service entrance around the back. Standing there under the yellow glow of a security light was Grandma Hattie. She had her Sunday hat on and a small, worn leather suitcase by her feet. She looked small against the backdrop of the looming dark house, but her spine was straight. I stepped out of the car. I did not let the driver open the door for me. I needed to walk on this ground one last time. Grandma Hattie looked up and saw me. She saw the gown. She saw the diamonds. But most importantly, she saw my eyes. She smiled a smile that warmed the cold night air. You came back, she whispered. I told you I would, Grandma, I said, taking her hands. I told you I would come get you. We are leaving, and we are never coming back to this place. I helped her into the back of the Phantom. She ran her hand over the leather seats, her eyes wide with wonder. Lord have mercy, she said softly. This is nicer than the church pew on Easter Sunday. We drove in silence, not the heavy silence of secrets, but the peaceful silence of freedom. We headed toward the city center, toward the skyline that was now etched with my name. We pulled up to the private entrance of the Sovereign Building. The elevator took us up 50 stories to the penthouse that was now my sanctuary. When the doors opened, Grandma Hattie gasped. The apartment was a palace of glass and steel floating above the clouds. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a 360-degree view of Atlanta. It was a view reserved for gods and kings, and now for a retired seamstress and her granddaughter. I walked over to the wet bar and picked up a bottle of vintage champagne. I poured 2 glasses. I handed one to her. She took it, her hand trembling slightly, not from age but from emotion. "To the New Year, Grandma," I said, raising my glass. She shook her head slowly, her eyes filled with tears of pride. "No, baby, to the truth. And to you. You did it. You really did it." We clinked glasses. The crystal rang out a clear, pure sound that signaled the end of the war. I walked out onto the balcony. The wind was crisp and cold, biting at my exposed skin, but I did not feel it. I felt a fire burning inside me. I looked out at the city below. The lights of Atlanta twinkled like a sea of stars. Somewhere down there in the dark, my father was lying in a hospital bed, realizing he was no longer the king. Somewhere my brother was weeping over his lost fortune. Somewhere my mother was staring at a foreclosure notice. My phone, which I had placed on the railing, began to vibrate. It buzzed angrily, dancing across the metal surface. I looked down at the screen. The notifications were flooding in. Missed call from Dante, missed call from Mom, text from Courtney begging for a second chance, text from Uncle Marcus asking for a loan, voicemail from the senator wanting to explain. They were clawing at the door. They were trying to find a crack in the armor. They wanted to be saved from the consequences of their own cruelty. I picked up the phone. I did not unlock it. I did not read the messages. I turned it over and popped the small tray on the side. I pulled out the SIM card, the tiny chip that connected me to their world. I held it up to the city lights for a moment, letting it catch the glow. Then I dropped it into my champagne glass. It sizzled softly as it sank to the bottom, drowning in the golden bubbles. The vibration stopped. The noise stopped. The past was dead. I took a sip of the champagne, tasting the victory. I turned back to Grandma Hattie, who was watching me with a knowing smile. "So what do we do now, baby?" she asked. I looked back at the horizon where the first hint of dawn was just beginning to break. "Now, Grandma," I said, "we live." The story of Aaliyah Washington teaches us that your value is never defined by how others treat you, even if those people are your own family. True power does not come from status or inheritance, but from resilience and the courage to build something of your own. When people show you they do not care, believe them, and use that rejection as fuel. Success is the ultimate silence to those who doubted you. Never let anyone dim your light just to make them feel comfortable in their darkness. If you are ready to rewrite your own story, hit that subscribe button and share this with someone who needs to be reminded of their worth.